I think you need to start the presentation.
I thought I did. I'm sorry.
Well, assuming we're started, I want to welcome everyone here to today's Ecology Center live event. As you're all getting logged on and settled in, I'd like you to know that this event is organized by the Ecology Center, a 56-year-old nonprofit organization that works for a just and healthy environment for people on the planet. This is one of our virtual programs on environmental health and justice, and we hope that you'll find it informative. We're recording today's program, and tomorrow it will be available for repeat viewing, sharing, and hours of information. My name is Mike Garfield. I'm the Ecology Center's Executive Director, and I'll be your host today. It's a pleasure to be with everyone. Thank you for participating in this Ecology Center live event on data centers. First, some housekeeping. After my introduction, we'll have two terrific presentations, followed by time for discussion. We're planning to wrap things up by 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If at any time during the session you have a question or a comment, please use the Q&A box to share it. After we hear from Wolfgang Bauer and Alexis Blisman, I'll read out questions for them and comments. There's a large crowd here and great interest in the topic, so we may not be able to address everyone's questions and comments, but we'll do our best. This program is being recorded and it will be available tomorrow. 3 years ago, virtually the only people who knew about data centers were distinguished professors of physics. Today, the news and opinions about them are everywhere in your social media feed, on national news broadcasts, at township board meetings. I couldn't watch the NBA playoffs without seeing ads touting the wonders of OpenAI's hyperscale facility in Washtenaw County. We hear they're the infrastructure for the technology that will cure cancer, solve the climate crisis, and ensure American military superiority, that they'll generate wealth for local schools, parks, and governments, that they'll lower electricity bills and hasten the clean energy transition. There is a lot of hype. And the hype even seems to be propping up the entire US stock market right now. But the real world examples are sobering. A nationwide Bloomberg analysis found that areas with heavy data center concentration have experienced electricity rate hikes as high as 267% over the past 5 years. The facilities use an extraordinary amount of energy, far greater than the most energy intensive industrial operations, with single facilities using more electricity than large cities. They typically use prodigious amounts of water and cover vast areas of land, some as large as Belle Isle in Detroit or the University of Michigan Central Campus in Ann Arbor. There is a lot of information and misinformation about these issues, and we're going to try to separate the one from the other today. I want to be clear, we're not going to address many of the related issues about artificial intelligence, its uses, regulation, and ethics. But I want to acknowledge that all these issues are intertwined. The environmental issues around data centers alone are complex enough. Fortunately, we're joined by two people who are very knowledgeable in this field. Our first speaker is Wolfgang Bauer. Dr. Bauer is a distinguished professor of physics and astronomy at Michigan State University. His research focuses on renewable power sources, global warming, and computer modeling of nonlinear systems at all scales, from collisions of atomic nuclei to the explosion of supernova. From 2013 to 2020, he was senior consultant and associate vice president at Michigan State University, leading the university's energy transition plan projects. He's an author of several leading textbooks in physics, and he has a new book coming out early next year that may be of interest to many of the non-physicists here. It's called Climate Apocalypse. Catastrophic global warming is more likely than ever, but it's still not too late to save ourselves. He will be speaking about data center basics. Again, let me remind you that if you have questions while the presentations are in progress, please post them in the Q&A. So please now let's welcome Dr. Wolfgang Bauer. Dr. Bauer.
Thank you, and I'll get started with my PowerPoint right away so we don't lose too much time. Um, First of all, Mike, do you see my intro slide?
Yes.
Okay, so data center basics. Uh, First of all, a data center is just basically the home for a large computer, and what has happened over the last maybe 80 years is nothing less than stunning. So I've been in computational science for about 40 years. And you can see in 1985 on the right, the fastest computer in the world could do a little more than 1 billion operations per second. And since then, in the last 40 years, computer performance has improved by roughly a factor of 1 billion. And so there's a picture of the 1976 fastest computer in the world, the Cray 1, in the middle. And at the bottom, this is El Capitan, the currently fastest computer in the world. It cost $600 million to build. It's at Livermore National Lab in California, not too far away from where I am right now. And it consumes 30 megawatts of power. For scale, all of MSU, with all 500 plus academic buildings, 40,000 undergraduates, 10,000 other students, and a total of maybe 60,000 people on campus, consumes on average 40 megawatts. So this computer just by itself consumes almost as much as all of MSU. And there's no end in sight for something called Moore's Law. Gordon Moore was one of the founders of Intel, and he predicted that computer speed doubles every 1 to 2 years and price halves in that time. And that's in the upper left, that's his famous graph of Moore's Law, and that's his likeness in front of it. I also show the iPhone 17. It comes in at 35 teraflops, so that's 35 trillion operations per second. And you can see that it's a factor of 100,000 faster than this Cray 1, the fastest supercomputer in the world, 40 years ago. So that's kind of amazing. So what has enabled that is parallel computing. So processor speed has been going up and up as predicted by Gordon Moore, but then sort of hit a wall around the year 2000. And the solution that people came up with is one, put more computer cores into a single chip that uses this GPU architecture, graphic processing unit, as opposed to central processing unit. And NVIDIA, the most valuable company in the world, is a direct consequence of this development. It's the first $5 trillion company, and its most recent chip is at the bottom, the Rubin. It has more than 20,000 cores per GPU. And then you want to pack these closer and closer together into data centers. You can have millions of cores. You need some parallel computing software architecture, and it requires ultra-high bandwidth network inside the data center. And all of this is limited just by the speed of light, which is roughly a foot per nanosecond. 1 billionth of a second, light can move by about 1 foot. Now, how do you measure efficiency of such computers? And one is how many operations can a computer perform for a given amount of electricity, so per watt of power. And the largest data centers can consume 100 megawatt, and there are plans now for example, in Saline Township in Michigan, for gigawatt data centers. A gigawatt is 1,000 megawatt. And then the second question is, how efficiently can one cool the computer? Because all of this electrical energy, in the end, that runs a computer is transferred into heat. And this heat must be expelled from the computer. So you need some efficient type of cooling. And the best way to do this is to circulate water inside the computer usually through the doors of the compute racks. And then this is a closed loop. And then on the outside, you have some kind of heat exchanger. And then you have to get rid of that heat through the heat exchanger. And the most efficient way to do this in terms of electricity is by evaporating water. So what I'm showing here is the inside and outside of the most efficient, in that sense, the greenest computer in the world, and they call it Green Cube. It's a 6-story data center in Darmstadt, Germany. It draws about 1.5 to 2 megawatt of electricity, and they cool just by evaporating water on the other side of these heat exchangers. And the rule of thumb is that they evaporate about 3 cubic meter of water. This is 800 gallon. And remember, this is just a 2 megawatt computing center. What's planned in Saline Township is a factor of 1,000 times bigger. So if they use water cooling, like I'm describing here, then they would evaporate 1 million gallon roughly on that scale per hour. This is MSU's data center. And I was one of the group of people that actually designed and then built. Well, I didn't personally build it, but we hired a company to build it for us, of a data center at MSU. Prior to that work, we had 70 small data centers, that would fit, let's say, in a closet or in like a dorm room size of environment, and some larger ones. And we consolidated all these into one and made the cooling much more efficient. And that was built in 2018. And what I show here in these graphs is the power consumption for each month, both for the compute load and for the mechanical load in 2024 and 2025. And I will just show this is what a 1 megawatt data center looks like. So MSU has about a 1 megawatt data center. What's planned for Saline Township is 1,000 times bigger. This data center fulfills pretty much all of the research needs that MSU has. There are very few calculations that need to be run on bigger national supercomputing centers like El Capitan that I showed earlier. This is a worldwide computer center that's run out of CERN in Switzerland, the International Particle Physics Lab. And really, this compute center spans all of the globe. There are 42 participating countries that each have substructures of this compute center, and the information flows back and forth through high-speed lines across the globe. There are a total of 170 sites that are part of this data center. So tier 0 is at CERN in Switzerland. The US tier 1 is at Fermilab in Illinois. And MSU runs a tier 2 facility that was constructed with a $3 million grant from the National Science Foundation. The reason why I'm mentioning this is data centers can be located anywhere in the world. And yes, colder places with lots of water and power have advantages. Colder simply because you got to get rid of the heat. And if the outside temperature is lower, that's advantageous for your cooling purposes. But the flip side is that these data centers can be reached from anywhere too. So investing heavily in data centers at a particular location does not guarantee high-tech jobs in the surrounding areas. So there are really only a few technicians required to perform routine maintenance and maybe a few armed guards. So even the most massive data center is not necessarily a seed facility for the next Silicon Valley. And the consequence of Moore's law is also whatever you invest today into computer hardware loses half of its value in just 1 year, and 3/4 in 2 years. You get this, right? Moore's law. Here's an example that is currently the largest data center in the state of Michigan. This is a Google Map 3D picture that I just took a couple of weeks ago, and it shows the current status of this so-called pyramid. This was initially built for Steelcase. It's a 663,000 square foot facility. They spent 111 million to build it, and then they abandoned it in 2010. Switch, the data center company, bought it for 22 million and converted it into this data center that you see right now in the year 2017. What I also show is the parking lots. And you can see there's very, very few cars there. It's really almost nobody, no human working there. This is what it looks on the inside, rows and rows of computers and water pipes that get rid of the heat to the outside. And then there's, as I said, there's just a few guards there that watch this facility 24/7. This is the saline data center that was approved in 2025 and that now has officially started its construction. It is 1.4 gigawatt, that's the design, which is 20 times higher than all of MSU's peak power needs. It's supposed to have 1.65 million square feet, and the costs initially were stated at 7 and now are much closer to 16 billion. This is providing AI infrastructure for OpenAI and Oracle, but it's not owned by these two companies, but by a company that was specially formed for this data center. The employment claim is 2,500 union construction jobs. I'll buy that. 450 permanent jobs on site, and another 1,500 jobs in the community. The Switch data center does not seem to agree with these numbers, but we will see. There are other examples of data centers that are this size. If you want to Google this, there's this PBS YouTube movie. It's called "We Saw What AI Data Centers Don't Want You to See." So this is a Stargate data center in Abilene, Texas, under construction, almost finished. It's about the same scale as the one planned for Salem Township. This is Colossus 2 data center in South Haven, Mississippi. This is not OpenAI. This is xAI, so home of Elon Musk Grok AI. This is how they're powered. What you see there is an infrared picture, and these yellow plumes that you see are gas turbines that provide the electricity locally. So the claim that they're powered by renewable energy, that may be the end goal, but right now that's not the case. Data center development hits Michigan's amid AI boom. This was, I think, an article in Bridge. So what's the ultimate goal? Artificial intelligence. So what people in the field generally believe is that there's an emergent property as one increases the scale of the number of computer nodes. This is not guaranteed. This is just something that's sort of an axiom of the field and assumed. So the question then is, can an algorithm become self-aware like we with our much smaller brain can be self-aware? But in any case, once this threshold is crossed, AI can evolve infinitely faster as compared to human evolution. And in Silicon Valley, some people even dream of creation of a digital god that solves all of our problems, combats human aging and related diseases. So there is a project, you can look that up. It's called the Calico Project. And in the end, you would create an omnipotent superintelligence. And I give a reference there. You can Google many more examples along this line of thought. But what if brute force is not the answer? And so, for example, there are heavy investments into quantum computing. And a quantum computer, once fully realized, and it's not fully realized yet, I admit, but once it's fully realized, it promises exponential speed increase over classical computers in data centers. And then the question is, will data centers, as currently constructed all over the country, become obsolete? And then these data centers are very power hungry, and they may pay for their new power production facilities, new electricity generation facilities right now. But typically, these are amortized over 20, 30, 40 years. And if these data centers go out of business, who pays for the overcapacity in this electricity generation? And I think we all know the answer. It's the ratepayer. And of course, who also pays for the cleanup cost? And I'll just give you, just as a side note, the human brain. So our power consumption, typically our whole body is about 120 watts a day, just from eating 2,500 calories per day. And then the human brain uses maybe 20% of that total input power. So 25 watt, not gigawatt, 25 watt. And so we know that even if AI becomes self-aware in these large data centers, AI may find a way to reduce its power consumption to down to where the human brain resides. So this power efficiency is many orders, 8, 9 orders of magnitude higher than the state-of-the-art AI data centers right now. And my last remark is water use. So these numbers are thrown around. Earlier I said this Salient data center may consume about 1 million gallon an hour, and uh, you can see how that goes into the 1 billion gallon regime per year, right? So this is an article in Ars Technica that was just published. Amazon claims that right now all of its data centers withdraw 2.5 billion gallons in 2025. That number is certainly going to go up, but if you compare it to other water consumption activities in the US, for example, golf courses, 500 and some billion gallons a year, and especially growing almonds in Southern California is incredibly water intensive. There's this movie that you can access. It's called Water and Power. It was an entrance in the Sundance Film Festival, and you see the staggering amount of water that's used up there. So, in my mind, the electricity is the big problem. The water is not such a big problem. People think about putting data centers into space, which I think will be nonsense for the foreseeable future. But data centers have begun to be constructed inside, under the ocean. Makes it much easier to cool. Nuclear power plants right now are near bodies of water, so you can use them for cooling rivers or the ocean also. And I think that will be development that will also be happening in data centers. So that was a quick overview, and I'm going to stop sharing and give the word to Ulysses.
Thank you, Dr. Bauer. I'm going to, I was delighted to hear about the energy efficiency of the human brain. And I'm going to introduce our second speaker, Alexis Blisman, who for the past 15 years has been serving as the Ecology Center's legislative and policy director. Alexis played a significant role in the development of Michigan's package of clean energy laws passed in 2023. And she has been deeply involved in the rate cases and other proceedings of the Michigan Public Service Commission, advocating for protective environmental and public health laws and regulations. She'll be speaking about the environmental challenges from data centers and regulatory solutions. I see that some folks have started populating the Q&A with questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A and we will try to get to as many of them as we can after Alexis's presentation. So over to you, Alexis.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, I'm going to start sharing as well. And there you go. Okay, so I'm going to actually talk a little bit about some of the broader environmental challenges and some things that we should, at least, from an environmental perspective, be doing in Michigan. But I'm going to focus most of my time on the work that's happening at the MPSC, Michigan Public Service Commission, that we're involved in, because right now it's the only place where anything around data centers actually is being regulated. And that's actually a big problem. So I'll sort of zip through these. Obviously, there's huge data center growth. Dr. Bauer talked about why Michigan is kind of attractive. There's water resources, there's land availability, there's some grid infrastructure that exists, and we are a cooler climate. Obviously, these proposals are already out there. This is sort of a map of some of the bigger ones. There are more coming. We don't really know how many yet, but these are what we're seeing so far. And some of them are massive. Two, largest that we know about right now, obviously, are the Saline Township one, and then there's the proposal for the Google data center in Augusta. So basics around environmental concerns. Obviously, electricity demand is a huge problem. Climate and emissions impact, and I'll get into that a little bit more when we get to the MPSC. Water use and cooling. There's also land use issues and impacts on the community. And then there are certainly some environmental justice considerations where different communities are going to be impacted in different ways. So some potential solutions are things around 100% clean energy procurement, efficiency standards, demand flexibility, water efficient designs that Dr. Bauer talked about as far as the cooling, community benefit agreements, and pollution protections and transparency, which right now we don't have very much of. One of the things that sort of Michigan folks are looking at is some of the states that were ahead of us. So particularly Virginia. And Virginia takeaways sort of show that there can be some economic development. There were certainly construction jobs that were created, although temporary, and some property taxes being paid. But they also started to experience huge impacts on their electric rates because the rest of the population was paying for it. Um, additional environmental concerns. And the bottom line is, Virginia's experience suggests that we really need to do proactive planning and strong cost allocation policies before we have these large scale data center developments in our state. And right now, you know, like I said, regulations don't exist. So just sort of a few recommendations for Michigan. First would be a moratorium on data centers until legislation can actually be created to make sure that Michigan's people and natural resources are protected. Requiring transparency in reporting of energy and water use, require developers to utilize high efficiency cooling, citing near clean energy resources, grid investments that will benefit all customers, and then aligning the data center growth with the climate and environmental goals that Michigan has set. And then in dealing with sort of the environmental justice issues, making sure that cumulative impacts are considered and that community benefit agreements do exist. Right now, I will say that earlier today, the Democrats in the Michigan Senate did introduce a package of bills around data centers. It's a small package, 5 bills that start to address a few of these issues, but certainly don't, I think, go far enough. And they were just dropped today, so I actually haven't had a chance to read through all of them. But just from what I know, the first one would require a permit for water use for consumptive use purposes over a certain amount. Another would require a separate rate class for large load customers. Another would have to do with labor agreements. Another would prevent some NDAs from being signed, especially by government officials. Again, that goes toward the transparency. And then another requiring community benefit agreements. And so, this is a start, but, we are looking at a reality in the Michigan legislature right now that, they are still working on the budget, and the budget is supposed to be done by the end of June. I'm not sure if they're going to make that deadline. And then later in the summer and then through the fall, the legislature isn't in session that much because, of course, it's an election year and everybody's out campaigning. And then the other reality that we're dealing with is, we have a split government right now, and it's hard to get a lot done. But this is an issue that really, it should be bipartisan. This is not a partisan issue. This is happening all over the state, and people are concerned everywhere. So this is a place where we would hope that both parties could get together to get something done. but we're still going to be talking about it throughout this year. We're going to be working to educate candidates who are running for election this fall. And if we can't get something done in this session, then we will be pushing for it to be at the top of everybody's list when we get into session next year. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to talk more about the MPSC and the work we're doing here because it is the only place that it's being, data centers are being regulated. It is the one space where there's actually sort of central commission to actually review these special contracts, to look at the rates, to look at the impact on consumers and ratepayers. Unfortunately, with Michigan, the water is dealt with really at the local and county level, the different water boards, but there's not statewide legislation that actually regulates it. And the state zoning and land use laws are also pretty loose. And so what happens is all of these smaller communities are left to deal with these big Goliaths coming in, and there really needs to be state legislation to make it uniform. The localities cannot afford to fight these on their own, so regulation is necessary. So first question we'll sort of look at is whether data centers can actually lower utility bills. And the fact is, it depends on how much the data centers are paying. Do they pay all their costs? If yes, then rates could decline. Unlikely they'll decline because the utilities are not about to do a rebate, but they could rise more slowly. If not, then consumers may end up subsidizing the infrastructure. How could they lower bills? Well, most utility costs are fixed. So things like power plants, transmission lines, distribution infrastructure, all these things, can be paid for, whether, electricity sales grow, and how many customers are on the system, the sales can be spread more over, toward the data centers who are really, making the need for electricity. So spreading fixed costs across toward data centers could potentially lower pressure on existing customers. Also, better use of existing infrastructure. Data centers are 24/7 operations and stable demand. So, could we then use demand response and use those batteries and that storage and everything to sort of spread some reliability and reduce some costs on some of the infrastructure investments. So flexible response, demand response, and data centers, load shifting, it can reduce peak system costs. Sorry, got ahead of myself. So the risks and concerns, and we talked about, Dr. Bauer talked about the fact that data centers are not worth as much after they've been built. And I was at another presentation that he did where he talked about China being littered with data centers that were built that are now obsolete. And we don't want that to happen. So here's a photo of a sort of dead data center. So transmission costs, can be socialized across ratepayers. Stranded assets, which utilities ultimately end up, getting money back for. And then the forecasting errors, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about forecasting when we get to the integrated resource plans. So, and then obviously cost shifting. So utilities need to make sure that data centers are paying for everything they're forcing us to generate, and make sure that they're highly efficient and utilized to help ratepayers instead of passing on costs. So some regulatory safeguards that can be put in place so that we don't end up costing ratepayers are long-term contracts, minimum bills, and exit fees, upfront contributions from the companies building the data centers, and then dedicated tariffs. And some of that has actually started to happen at the MPSC through some of the casework that we've been doing. I'm gonna get to that. Large load tariff and data center cases. So the Ecology Center has been intervening in cases at the Public Service Commission for several years now. We work with a few partners that we intervene with. We're represented by Environmental Law and Policy Center as our attorneys, with a group with Vote Solar and Union of Concerned Scientists. And together, we have been arguing in rate cases for a long time. The last integrated resource plan, I work with NRDC and Sierra Club and Earth Justice on the energy efficiency or energy waste reduction cases. But this year, we've been arguing, well, last year and a half. We've been forming arguments within these different cases that, data centers are different from traditional industrial load. And so, there need to be rates specifically for data centers, that they can't just be on the normal industrial load rates. That enhanced reliability review is necessary. That scenario planning is really critical because we need to know sort of what we need to power these things. A big part of our argument is about affordability. So data centers need to pay their fair share, avoid any kind of cost shifting. And then for our climate goals, we've been arguing very steadily that new load should bring in clean energy and support clean energy growth. We should not be building new gas plants to support them. Virtual power plants and demand response can again help level some of the issues when things go down. They can help deal with peak demand. And then again, transparency is really essential to all of this because every one of these cases, if you get into, well, any data center case that you get into has a whole bunch of NDAs. And so I'll get to that when I talk about Google. But so really briefly, the first large load data center or large load tariff case was the decision in the consumer's energy tariff case. And so that one, the MPSC ordered long-term contracts, required minimum billing obligations, required exit fees if, data center leaves, and, some financial security requirements as well as consumer protections. So that case sort of set the stage. It was the first case where large load tariff was actually put in place. The next case that we intervened in was sort of the first really large data center that was proposed at the MPSC this year. And I know a lot of people have been paying a lot of attention to the Saline Township case. So it was for a special contract. The MPSC did approve the contract. It is being appealed by, we did try to intervene, but this was done as an ex parte case. And we tried to say no, that this should not be ex parte, that people have a right to discovery, to learn more. And the MPSC went ahead and approved it without making it a contested case. And in that decision, they did agree with us that, no cost shifting would be allowed, that financial protections would need to be in place. And, talked about the planning requirements. But where they diverged is they didn't really go anywhere with the, clean energy mandates, and they didn't allow for a fully contested case. And then they allowed for incremental regulation instead of really putting this all up front. So where that stands right now, construction has begun, and DTE did agree to all of the conditions that the MPSC put in place. But currently, the Attorney General is appealing that decision to make it not contested. So it's at the um, Court of Appeals to determine whether they should go back and make it a contested case. I think it's unlikely that that will be successful, but there definitely is a challenge. And by the way, this case played out when Google decided to build their new data center, they decided from the beginning to make it a contested case. So we are now intervened in that case as well, making a lot of the same arguments. So one thing is that DTE and in Indiana, Michigan Power are now working through large load tariff cases as well. DTE sort of got pushed in after the special contract approval, but there's sort of a broader case around large load tariffs that we are still arguing, and it's on the way. Make sure I am in time. So data centers and integrated resource planning. I want to talk about this because this is a really critical piece. It relates to sort of what's going to be happening over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So an integrated resource plan is a 15 to 20-year utility planning document, although really they only get locked in for the next 5 to 7 years. Utilities are required to file a new integrated resource plan every 5 years. This year, DTE and consumers each will be filing their plans for the first time since the new 2023 energy laws passed. And at that point, we didn't know about this huge, load growth that we would be dealing with. Traditionally, Michigan has had, pretty modest load growth. Data centers are just changing that entirely. And so as the utilities are filing, they are doing forecasting for this large growth demand over the next 15 to 20 years, but also planning for sort of when all of these things will come online. And interesting piece of this is a lot of them are not going to come online until until about 6, 7 years from now. And so even though they're forecasting for the next 15, 20 years, they're not necessarily locked in. So past this 5. So what we're sort of anticipating, and we won't see these filings until the fall. Consumers had indicated earlier that they were going to file in June and have since pushed that back to September. DT had always said the fall, September, and I think are sort of hoping that this Google case will be resolved before them because it will help them in their planning. So the integrated resource plan plans, generation, what's needed to produce the power we need, transmission to deliver it, storage, and what types of energy. And it can influence for sure customer rates. So why data centers matter in this? Just the massive amount of energy that's going to be needed. So with these higher load forecasts, there's greater uncertainty. And in addition to making sure that we have enough to actually power everything that needs power, there's a challenge when it comes to what are we building? How long does it take to actually build out the load that we need? And what is that mix going to be? So in addition to sort of the, just how much, we have the 2023 laws, which have requirements around renewable energy and, clean energy. But when these laws were passed, there were a couple off ramps put in. And so, and we didn't want them, but that's how we were able to get it through. So these off ramps sort of say that, if the utilities cannot meet the demand that's necessary with renewables in time, to stop massive blackouts, um, then they do have an off ramp to maybe build some new fossil fuel plants. And so we're at real risk for this increase in load to end up with us building more gas plants. And so we are, both trying to balance the reliability, the affordability, and all of the clean energy requirements to make sure that we're not overbuilding, that we're not committing to a 20-year gas plant that may end up, closing because the data centers end up stranded as well. There are lots of opportunities for renewables within the integrated resource plan and with the data centers. But there's still all of this risk. There's also opportunities for grid modernization, but we, again, need to make sure that the off ramps are not available. So the integrated resource plans are going to be really critical to how we're looking at, what we're building, how we're dealing with the data center boom, and how we're making sure that we're not overbuilding for end up with deserted data centers all over our state. So zoomed through that because I know there are a lot of questions out there. So I will stop sharing and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Dr. Bauer. Great presentations, very interesting and informative. We do have a lot of questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to try to group some of them together and maybe start with maybe first I'd like to start just by appreciating everybody who's commenting and everybody who's been participating in this event. And I appreciate the comments people shared about a prospective data center at Oakland University and the one that's in the process of in the approval process in Wayne County, in Van Buren Township. I think I'd like to start with the energy issues that a number of people are raising, and continue there. There is a question here, and I wonder if either of you can speak to this about the Selene data center in particular. Has the developer there or DTE committed to any clean energy use there, or willingness to restrict demand during peak periods? Can you speak to the commitments that are being made by the developers and DTE there?
That I know
So, sorry, do you want to go ahead?
of. I just said none that I know of.
Yeah, so no, the Selene data center, there aren't those kind of commitments. And this is another reason why a contested case would have been really critical, because we could have pushed back and pushed them on some of these things. Google, on the other hand, with their proposal, is actually committed to all renewable, and actually has said that they do not want to be responsible for things like the Monroe coal plant, which is set to be offline by 2032, being extended. So Google is actually, this is not taking a pro or con, but is definitely being a somewhat better citizen about this than the Selene data center is.
And that speaks to another question that got asked about whether a data center, even a large hyperscale facility, can be run entirely off of solar and batteries. Would you like to speak to that, Dr. Bauer?
I believe it cannot. I mean, with conventional batteries, I mean, we have the largest battery in Michigan is actually not a chemical battery, it's not lithium ion. It's the Ludington pump storage plant. So if you include that and wind farms and solar, yes, there's a case that you could make. But as we know, you know, the sun doesn't shine at night. That's trivial, but we also get a lot less solar radiation in January and February than we do in July and August. And so a data center is basically set up to run at equal load day and night every day of the year. So it's really hard to just do this off renewable. I know Google had that as a goal um, at some point, that they wanted their entire operation, but there has to be some kind of bookkeeping trickery to really make that work. So with solar alone and wind alone, it doesn't work. Where it could work is deep geothermal. And there's actually a company called Furbo that has signed a contract with Google, and they are operating, I think, in the Nevada desert. They can be basically located anywhere, because if you drill down maybe 3 miles from anywhere that you're sitting right now, where I'm sitting, you will find that the rock below our feet, 3 miles down, is hotter than the boiling temperature of water. That's worldwide. Okay, so if you go that far down and you dig down and you pump water down a pipe, you can turn that into steep and bring it up again. That will rise, and run a power plant with that. So that's called deep geothermal or engineered geothermal energy. McKinsey just issued a report last September that predicts that we might have power as cheap as maybe 6 or 7 cents per kilowatt hour in 10 years from now from this technology. And it's basically inexhaustible. The US Department of Energy in the previous administration already projected that we can have 120 gigawatt of electrical power from that type of technology, and the workforce exists. There's 100,000 people trained to run the drill rigs for natural gas fracking, and it's the same kind of drilling that can be used there. So I mean, that could work, but right now it cannot be stood up immediately. So that's why these huge data centers buy gas engines and gas turbines like crazy. And there's actually also a wait of maybe 2 years to get your hand on a gas turbine. People are signing contracts for small modular nuclear power plants right now to put that as their electricity source. So that's a much wider discussion to be had there.
Just a quick follow-up on the examples for you, Alexis. There's a question about the location of the Google site you were talking about. Is that the Van Buren site?
Yeah, that's the Van Buren Township. So I
And
mean, the other thing about it is it's a better site, right? Saline is sitting in the middle of farmland, whereas the Van Buren Township is actually a former industrial site with a view of the freeway, and makes a little bit more sense if you're going to build something like this. But yeah, that's the big one.
our commenters noting that there's some of that development would be in wetlands and they'll need a state permit for that. So there's some land use issues around that. And maybe it'd be good to turn to some of the land use issues a little bit. There are a number of questions people have asked about the development of some of these sites and about their operation too. Or my old friend Barry Lonick here is here, Barry, and he's asked if there are cases where data centers have expanded beyond their original footprint. Do you know about cases like that, Dr. Bauer?
And it's almost easier to start fresh with the data center because the way that they're laid out. But there are cases where there's basically modular data centers, like the Switch data center in Grand Rapids can be expanded beyond the current capacity by simply adding other modules. And so if you're clever and you're setting your data center up like this, you can do that. But of course, you have to assure that the power can flow to your data center and the heat can be transported away. In some cases, this is easy. In some cases, it's prohibitively expensive.
I mean, I think the issue that we're seeing all over the country is that some of the size of some of these facilities has shocked local communities, whether they're rural or urban. And as I think people on this call know, in Michigan, land use decisions are made at the very local level, sometimes by tiny townships that are hard pressed to fight the power of a large corporation if they get hauled into court after issuing
Right.
an unfavorable decision.
And that's
So,
what happened in Saline.
Mhm.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, so, what kind of what kind of considerations do you all think need to be brought into some of these siting decisions? Dr. Bauer, do you want to offer any thoughts for us on that?
Yeah, so first of all, we're all part of the MISO grid, right? So uh, everybody in the end, these data centers usually don't exist on an island where they make their own power. So they're connected to the overall grid, and that puts an additional load that's there for all of us. And if additional power plants are not built as a consequence, the brownout and blackout risk increases for all of us. Now, as far as the local utilities in Michigan are concerned, it's really a duopoly. DTE and consumers have the overwhelming market share salted away between them. So to them, it's an advantage to have a new customer that draws a gigawatt because that means, now you have justification for building another, say, nuclear power plant of 1 gigawatt, right? And utilities in our state have a guaranteed return on investment. So the bigger the investment, the bigger the profit they make. So in this case, the utilities are all in favor of it, and the risk can be offloaded over everybody that is part of the MISO grid.
But
Jeff Olson asked. Oh, go ahead, Alexis.
sorry, were you talking specifically about the power, or were you asking
Yes,
about other?
electrical power.
No, I was asking Mike. Were you asking about some of the other land use issues about zoning and siting and all of that?
Sure, potentially, yes. Go ahead.
So yeah, because we were talking about, and I had mentioned this, and my thing about, localities just can't afford to have these fights, and so, there needs to be put in place, legislation statewide that specifically deals with siting of these large load data centers. It just can't be left to the municipalities to fight it out. I mean, they don't even people, at this level just, I mean, don't have that expertise and deal with it, nor do they have the financial ability to fight them. And so having some state guidelines and rules need just is really critical.
Thanks. I want to just share some appreciation for all the commenters who are raising questions and thoughts about the control of our economy and culture by leading technologists right now. Comments about the governor and about politics in Michigan. There are a lot of big issues that the data center build out and the AI build out really implicate. Just a couple of things to close with. Real specifically, let me close with two questions. Number one, very specifically, Jeff Olson asked another question about the Saline facility. I think a lot of people are interested in here, and whether either of you know about the actual cost of it. He said, reading this, that the construction might cost as much as $16 billion. I think you used that number too, Dr. Bauer. But he read that the equipment might add as much as another $40 billion. Does that sound reasonable, or any opinions about that? Does the equipment in these facilities cost that much?
the equipment is the overwhelming share of the cost, the computers, the racks themselves.
Hmm.
But I was under the impression the 16 billion was the all-in cost. To pour concrete slabs is not that expensive. To build transformers is not that expensive. I mean, not on the multi-billion scale. So I was under the impression 16 billion was the all-in, but I may be mistaken there.
We're we're at our 6:30 time, but I'm going to close with one last question for you two, and we'll make this a big quick picture question. One of our commenters asked if it would make sense to turn data centers into a public utility. What do you you both think about that idea?
I I have no answer to that. I mean, uh,
It's it's interesting.
All right,
it's
all
a
right.
public
I've left them.
utility. We all have responsibility for it, and I'm not so sure how this whole data center development will be going. As I mentioned, quantum computing may kill all data centers if it's really successful. And then, do we really want to have, as the Michigan public, all these stranded assets on our hand, right?
Well, we almost that question almost caught our panel speechless. But thank you for the closing comments, Dr. Bauer. Thank you very much, Alexis. Thanks everybody for thanks everybody for logging on today. I appreciate all of the questions. We'll be notifying you and all the other people who registered about how to watch this on repeat. I want to also thank Jessica Owen, who produced today's program. Want to remind you too that this event was put on by the Ecology Center, a nonprofit organization. And if you appreciate the work that we do and want to support the organization, donations are welcome at ecocenter.org. Most of all, please stay in touch, and thank you very much for participating in this Ecology Center Live. And have a
And
great evening.
can I add one
Oh, and
last
one
thing?
more comment. One last thing.
Yes. So I know that we had an hour, so I zipped through some stuff and there are a lot of questions unanswered. Um, I can't promise how quickly I will answer you, but if you have questions that you want to ask, you are free to email me. I'm just Alexis at EcoCenter. I won't be able to answer everything, but I will certainly answer, stuff about what we're working on, and I'll try to answer your questions or at least get you an answer. Thank you.
Mike, feel free to distribute my email as well, and then I know there's many questions here that I can and should answer, and I will if you email them to me.
We will follow up with all of you who asked questions. And again, appreciate everybody's participation here. Thank you very much for being a part of this. Quite a big, we've got quite a big issue on our hands.
We do. Thank you.